Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, whether you're in Australia or you're overseas, this is incredibly important information for you. And I guess that we really don't, well, we do know why people miscarry. And I think there are, 3 or 4 key reasons why people have miscarriages. And so I'm going to talk to you about that today. I'd love your input as we go along. So if you have some feedback for me, put it into the chat box. I'd like to know, firstly, if you have the MTHFR gene, you know anything about the MTHFR gene, or this is brand new information for you. So let me just share my screen and we'll jump into the presentation and we'll have time for questions afterwards. So, all right, so this is a really important question. Has anyone in your family had a miscarriage? And the reason it's an important question is because it gives us some really good clues as to what could be going on and why you may have problems with fertility. So my name's Carolyn Ladowski. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder of MTHFR Support Australia, and I have been working for over 10 years now with infertility patients to help them understand MTHFR polymorphisms. And 90% of the patients that come to us have had previous miscarriage, previous failed IVF, stillbirths, and we have such a good percentage rate of getting people pregnant with that sort of background that I know that we are definitely on the right track. And I have just finished my thesis in looking at the forms and dosages of folate that practitioners are using with patients with infertility and MTHFR polymorphisms and what the outcome of those is in terms of fertility. So we had 12 patients that had come in with multiple miscarriages, had been diagnosed professionally with infertility, and 11 of them fell pregnant with the increase in folate and the different form of folate, and 10 of them successfully had a live birth. So you may have seen many practitioners that said, look, MTHFR doesn't matter, form of folate doesn't matter, you've been given folic acid, that's normal, that's what you should be taking. So what I'm going to teach you today is all of that is, in my book, incorrect. So the fact that someone in your family has had a miscarriage gives us really good clues. And the big clue is that you're more than likely to have an MTHFR polymorphism, which means it's a mutation in the MTHFR gene that affects your folate. And remember that folate is the most important nutrient for you to successfully not only fall pregnant, but stay pregnant. So folate does matter. The form does matter. The dose does matter. So we are told by health policy makers that 500 micrograms is what you should be taking of folic acid. And I'm going to explain the difference between folic acid and folate today. So 500 micrograms for someone who has 2 copies of the MTHFR gene, not nearly enough. And that's the reason that you miscarry, because you're just not taking enough and you're probably taking the wrong form. So if you can understand what you need to do, you can change the outcome. So my personal mission is to let every single woman and male who are in that space of infertility to understand what they need to do to minimize that risk, because there's way too many people. 25% of all pregnancies end in a miscarriage. That's 1 in 4. That's a huge percentage when you think that there are millions of people trying to fall pregnant every single day. And if you look at 15%, infertility is rife, and 15% of couples, which is 70 million couples, are affected. And you see ads, and the normal process is this. You go to your doctor and you say, I'm not able to fall pregnant. How long have you been trying? I've been trying for a year. Okay, I'll refer you to a fertility centre. You go to the fertility centre and automatically you're put into IVF. The problem is half of people, 70 million, so that's 35 million couples will go into IVF and 70% will fail. Because if you've got low folate, it doesn't matter. If you've got the wrong form of folate, it doesn't matter. And what the research is telling us is that when you go into IVF, that petri dish that you are joining that egg and sperm does not have the methyl donors that you need. And therefore, if you are low in your methyl groups, chances are that will fail. And at a cost of 8,000 to 10,000 per pop. So one of the girls in my research study had 10 failed IVF, 10, and she successfully fell pregnant, no IVF. So I really want you to understand that there is a lot of good that's going to come out of this webinar for you if you don't know that you have the MTHFR gene particularly, because this is a new avenue for you, and it really means that you've got a great opportunity to change things. So let's look at the form of folate, because there's different forms, and generically most practitioners will say folic acid when they mean folate. Folic acid, though, is synthetic. It's made in a lab and it is not naturally occurring in your body. So folic acid is what we fortify foods with by law. So here in Australia and in the US and other countries around the world, we fortify our bread flour and other products, grain products, with folic acid. Now, we did that originally because there were poorer communities that couldn't afford prenatal supplements. They weren't eating a lot of leafy green vegetables, and so there was a high rate of neural tube defects. And so what they did is they put 140 micrograms per 100 grams into flour products, and it definitely did help with the neural tube defect rate. It did a good job. But the problem is, since that health policy was introduced, we're getting way more folic acid than we were ever meant to get. So let's say you wake up in the morning and you have a breakfast cereal fortified with folic acid. You have a sandwich for lunch, fortified with folic acid. You have pasta or biscuits or something out of a packet through the day, fortified with folic acid. Then you take a prenatal with folic acid, and in the US, let's face it, that could be 800 micrograms, 1,000 micrograms. And the research tells us that in all countries that have the fortification program, the level of folic acid is building up in the blood, and they call that unmetabolized folic acid. And the reason it's unmetabolized, it's not being used, is because there is an enzyme called MTHFR that processes that folic acid, but it can only cope with a little bit. So if you are having foods fortified with folic acid, chances are you're getting more than that enzyme can cope with. So you get a buildup of the wrong form of folate because it's not being shunted down your good pathway. And the problem is then you get a lack of the good, because it actually has a feedback mechanism and affects the uptake of your active folate. The second is folinic, and some of you probably have been given folinic acid, and it is an active form, but it still needs the MTHFR gene to be converted to the biologically active form, which is this one on the right, methylfolate. So we call it 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. That is the biologically active form that you need for your DNA. You need it for, that is the form of folate that crosses the placenta to the baby. And that is the form of folate that goes to the brain to support your mental health. No other form of folate does that. So if you are taking folic acid, and you're eating foods fortified with folic acid, chances are you are minimizing your methylfolate. And if you have the MTHFR gene on top of that, then that is a big problem. Now, if we look at this, what it looks like graphically, so folic acid sort of comes in here at the top. And this is the enzyme DHFR, or dihydrofolate reductase, that has to metabolize it and pass it all the way down here to your active 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. That's a long pathway to go. You've got a lot to do that. Folinic is here. It doesn't need DHFR, neither does methylfolate. So this is active, but this is the form that you need for DNA. So when you eat your dietary folate, it comes in here as a tetrahydrofolate, or rather a dihydrofolate or tetrahydrofolate that then gets converted. So you don't want to be taking folic acid if you've got a problem right down here. So let me tell you about a case, and this is representative of most of the patients that we see in our clinic. So Jenny was 36 years of age. When she came to see me, she had had multiple miscarriages, usually before 12 weeks. And we normally see that before 12 weeks, you lose it because it really does relate to the DNA quality, either of the sperm or the egg. So most of her attempts were on IVF, and she was on so many herbs and so many supplements. When she put them on my desk, her and her husband's, it was like 50 bottles. And so I said to her, all right, let's just shove all of these aside and let's really look at what we need to do. So we refined the diet. We worked on getting a B12 up, getting a folate up, really getting a folate up. We put her on 10 times the amount of folate that she was on. And she said to me, I now want to go back to IVF and use the old eggs. And I said, well, why do you want to use the old eggs? Oh, they're there. I just want to use them, which is not a great idea, because if you've got old eggs and they haven't had the benefit of all the new folate and the new nutrients, you're still going to end up in the same boat. So what happened was she went into IVF, she used the old eggs, she did fall pregnant, but guess what? She miscarried. And I said to her, well, I'm really not unhappy about it because I didn't want you to use the old eggs in the first place. So we started again. We didn't go into IVF. She fell pregnant, no IVF. We put her on our special autoimmune formula as well, and she fell pregnant, and there's little baby Jack. She then had a second pregnancy not long after, about 18 months, and she had a little girl, and she's now trying for her number 3. No miscarriages, no failed IVF, no nothing. And what was really interesting is she sent me a note afterwards, and she said, you know, I want to thank you for your guidance and support in helping us create a beautiful, healthy baby. Beyond that, you have helped us every day through improved well-being, and I had a dream pregnancy. We call the methylfolate our happy tablets, because what it actually did was change her personality in a way. It gave her renewed confidence. She was quite shy and, you know, quite reserved when I first met her, but she's now confident, she's happy, she's balanced, and we just made up for that, that genetic deficiency she had, and her body then went on to do what it really needed to do. So, and I'm sure all of you would know, and one of the reasons you're here is that there's a lot of different issues: hormonal, ovulation, low healthy cervical mucus, perhaps the endometrium's not healthy, maybe there's not enough progesterone, not enough follicles, multiple miscarriages. And when you consider that there are obviously multiple factors, you've got your genetic susceptibility, you've got lack of folate that comes with perhaps that genetic susceptibility. I think one of the biggest issues is we don't think about preconception care in terms of you've got to have a minimum of 4 months, minimum. Because if you start taking a prenatal and go, oh yeah, I'm fine, what you've got to realize is all those cells that are going to replicate to support the baby's growth and development, therefore they live for 4 months. So if you have, let's say you start taking your folate today, you haven't given good nutrients to all your cells for 4 months. For men, it's 3 months. So you've got to have that preparation time. And it's even more important now, because what we know is that what you do today is not only going to affect your baby, but your baby's baby and their baby, perhaps 4 generations. What you do in preconception, they've actually shown, can actually affect the health of your child long term. So asthma, I really believe if you do proper methylation support leading into it, chances of your child having allergies and asthma is diminished. Chances of your baby having cardiovascular disease or diabetes later in life is diminished. And the research is now telling us that. So it's really important that preparation time is adhered to. I also think that we don't balance our nutrients effectively. We don't look at zinc, we don't look at copper, we don't look at iodine. And very few doctors actually look at thyroid function and consider that to be super important when it comes to fertility. But the amount of women that try and go into preconception with low iodine levels just never ceases to amaze me. So we've got to be looking at the nutrition as well. Those with MTHFR polymorphisms, we know that detoxification isn't as good as it should be. So evaluating that before you fall pregnant and ensuring that you're detoxing is going to mean that you're clearing those toxins, because these toxins, they do cross the placenta and they do go to the baby when it's in utero. So doing some cleaning before, and that's why we need the 4 months, is actually really good. And thyroid issues, the amount of women with MTHFR and Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid disorder, is really large. So being able to evaluate that and work out whether that is a factor for you is super important. So we look at folate. We know that a lack of in the research is attributed to a lot of different things, as we talked about, the neural tube defects, but even sperm quality. So the data with MTHFR and sperm quality, it affects it hugely. The number, the quality, and the ability for it to even swim to get to the egg is compromised when we look at MTHFR. We also have clotting disorders. Autism is associated with low folate. So is ADD, ADHD, allergies, and low birth weight. So when we consider that for you to fall pregnant, for some of you, that's easy for you to do. But for you to stay pregnant, you've got to have those elements right. And it's really about sometimes having 10 times more folate than you have. And if folate is the key to you staying pregnant, then you can understand how important the MTHFR gene is. Now, none of you have as yet have shared any info about your MTHFR gene that I can see. Mind you, I can't see my chat box. Anyway, so if you don't know what MTHFR is, it is an enzyme that converts the folate you eat, so the leafy green veggies, into that 5-MTHF, because that's really what your body has to do. At the end of the day, you saw that chart. At the very end is that MTHFR gene that then gives you the good folate. And so this MTHFR gene is the last gate that goes, okay, I'm going to take all those precursor folates and I'm going to give you the active folate. So if you've got a problem with this, so we say your parents both have 2 copies of that gene, right? Randomly, you are assigned 1 copy of each. Now, if you have 2 copies, if you got 1 mutated from mum, 1 mutated from dad, that makes you homozygous. If you have only 1 copy and you got it from either mum or dad, you're heterozygous. So those people who are homozygous, this MTHFR gene is downregulated by up to 70%. So if you had a bucket, literally a bucket of folate a day, and you sat there and you ate all that spinach, you would only get 30% of that going through to help your DNA. So you can't do it from a dietary perspective. You have got to be taking a supplement. So remember, here's our chart again. You've got to be making this, and here's your MTHFR gene right at the bottom that allows you to take this 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate and make it into 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. So if you've got a block here, what we endeavor to do is jump over it to give you that. And that is the difference between you staying pregnant and not staying pregnant. So this little methylfolate that you now know about, so Linda's saying she's had 2 miscarriages and unexplained infertility, but did not test for MTHFR. Okay, so Linda, this is so important for you. So that's what you and your partner have to do. Is the first thing I want you to do is check for MTHFR. So if you go onto our website, mthfrsupport.com.au, it's down the bottom of this slide, go into the shop and you'll be able to order your MTHFR kit for you and your partner. Really, really important that you do that. Jody is heterozygous A1298C. And lucky for you, Jody, that is the one that affects you the least, but it's still roughly a 20% downregulation. So here's what our methylfolate, that active folate, makes. It makes something called a methyl group, and it's essentially just a carbon surrounded by 3 hydrogens, but it's got this open arm, and this open arm latches on to your amino acids and your proteins and your enzymes, and it lets it do its job. So for example, for you to get rid of your histamine, which is your allergy response, you have to have a methyl group. For you to make or clear toxic estrogen, you need that methyl group. For you to create creatine for muscles, you need that little methyl group. For you to detox properly, you need that little methyl group. And for you to cope with stress, you need that little methyl group. So if you're not creating these, a lot of your biochemistry, not just your fertility and your hormones, will actually get affected. So if we now look at, let's go to here, these are some of the things that are attributed to having not enough of those little methyl groups, which is, and this is not by any means the whole list. Whoops, went too far. It is the list that, you know, we say, well, think about this. If you have any of this in your family history, your mum, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, chances are you've probably got some sort of issues with your MTHFR and or lack of folate. Now, this is a really, really good graphic because it demonstrates to you how you should not be doing all the work here, because what your partner does and the evaluation of your partner's genes and your partner's bloods and everything else is really super important. So have a look at this. Let's say your partner has 1 copy of the MTHFR gene and you have 1 copy of the MTHFR gene. So you're both heterozygous. Your baby has a 1 in 4 chance of being homozygous. And if you or your partner's folate isn't as good as it should be, then the homozygous babies are the ones that are more likely to miscarry. Now, let's say we left you as heterozygous, so one copy, and we turned around and we said, well, your partner has two, so he's homozygous. All of a sudden, every second child has a greater chance of miscarrying because they're homozygous. The good news about this, though, is if you know and understand it, the risk goes away. Because if you're making up for the lack of folate because of that MTHFR gene, then it doesn't matter if your baby's homozygous because it is getting the folate that it needs to survive. So this is a really important concept. There is absolutely no point whatsoever in you doing all the work and you not doing the work with your partner. Because if your partner has MTHFR and you do not, you can still miscarry. I'll say that again. If your partner has MTHFR and you do not, you can still miscarry if you haven't made up for the lack of folate from dad. Because remember, 50% of the DNA comes from you and him. And so if his part of the DNA falls down, you will still miscarry. So that's really important. Cecilia's compound heterozygous, but your partner has no issues with the MTHFR. What is the downregulation? So compound heterozygous is a 50% downregulation. So very significant. Okay, I'm just trying to get my next slide. All right. So if we look at what the research says with female infertility, particularly when we look at sort of going into IVF, you can have lower ovarian reserve, a diminished response to follicular stimulation. So really all the drugs don't work as well as they should, a reduced chance of a live birth after IVF, and egg death. So there's no guarantee. And that's what the really interesting thing is. A lot of the patients that come to us have had failed IVF. And very few of them, maybe 10%, go back to IVF to achieve a successful pregnancy. Because when you do things the right way, they actually don't need the IVF. Now, if we look at male, remember we said MTHFR really does affect the sperm. So you get lower sperm count, you get a higher DNA fragmentation rate, which means the quality of the DNA is pretty crappy. You get reduced motility of the sperm, so it can't swim to get to the egg, and you get greater infertility. So I think it's important to look at the research because it gives us some really good clues. I mean, there's a lot of research, and if your doctors or specialists have said MTHFR doesn't matter, well, you know, we'll send you a copy of this presentation, print out the slides and show them. So this was looking at the parent's MTHFR and the risk of recurrent pregnancy loss. And you can see there the conclusion. It says, in summary, the results of our meta-analysis indicate that both male and female MTHFR polymorphisms are associated with recurrent pregnancy loss. This one looked at the incidence of cleft lip in people with MTHFR polymorphisms. And it says the homozygous children, again, they're obviously the most at risk, may have an increased risk of cleft lip and cleft palate, particularly if they're the homozygous ones. This one looked at folic acid. Now, if any of you have been into a fertility centre or you've had IVF and they see that you're homozygous MTHFR, the standard protocol is we give you 5 milligrams of folic acid. Now, you know now that that's not the right strategy. And this particular study looked at folic acid supplementation and MTHFR and IVF outcome. And they said high dose folic acid intakes and MTHFR gene variations seem not to be associated with helping women to achieve pregnancy during or after fertility treatment. Well, that's no surprise, is it? Because they're using folic acid. They're not using methylfolate. This one looked at MTHFR and again, recurrent spontaneous abortions or recurrent miscarriage. And it said we noticed a high frequency of MTHFR with the T allele on the male side. And so again, it supports that hypothesis that even if you don't have an MTHFR, but your partner does, you can still miscarry. This one looked at Down syndrome and said the first report on MTHFR, C677T, and A1298C polymorphisms in trisomy 21, that's Down syndrome, showed that it is related. So any of these midline disorders, and also that trisomy 21 is a DNA change or a switch, and that's caused by that lack of methyl group to do the job to create the good quality DNA. This one looked at ovarian follicular activity in those with MTHFR and in IVF. And so it says the A1298C, but not the C677T, is associated with higher FSH levels. So many of you, your doctors will look at the results and go, oh, your FSH is too high. Your fertility is decreasing. Codswallop. At the end of the day, when you take the right form of folate, your hormones will come back into play. So don't be afraid if you've got a high FSH. It does not mean your fertility is waning. It does not mean you've got to hurry into IVF. I mean, most of you would know that there's this sense of urgency. If you're not in IVF, by the time you're 30, you're over the hill. Well, it's rubbish, because we are successfully getting women well into their 40s pregnant without IVF. So it's definitely not a cause for, rush into something. This is another patient. Catherine had one child. She was in her 30s, late 30s, and she was desperate for another child. But she had tried for 10 years to fall pregnant with her first little girl and was told by her fertility specialist, look, sorry, there's little or no hope. We don't think you've even got a 2 or 3% chance of falling pregnant with IVF. So she didn't know that she had MTHFR. I'm going back 12 years. So we tested her. We found out she did. We worked on her methylation capacity. And I feel like it's a really good sign if you just start to generally feel way better once you start with the methylation component. So we worked on a methylation. She started to feel better, and she was told IVF wouldn't work. So she was planning to move back to the UK with her husband, and she said, look, I'm going to have IVF before I go. And I said, no, don't do it before you go, because moving, let alone moving country, is really stressful. Why don't you wait, get settled in the UK, when everything's calmed down, then try IVF. So she rang me and she said, guess what? I'm pregnant. And I said, oh, I didn't know you went into IVF. She said, I didn't. So here she's been told that, and she was, early 40s by the time she fell pregnant. She didn't have any IVF, and she still successfully fell pregnant. So I don't want you to think, you've got to rush. I don't want you to think that IVF is the be all and end all, because I really don't think it is. And I don't want you to be disheartened by anything you've been told before, because I see patients every day that are told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you've got infertility, you're never going to fall pregnant, go into IVF, you've got to do it now. And it's not necessarily what you need to do. This is another patient, Anna. She came to see me, didn't know that she had the MTHFR gene. She mostly had a lot of thyroid issues. So we worked really hard to fix the thyroid issues. And then a year later, she said, well, I want to fall pregnant. I'm getting married soon, but I want to fall pregnant straight away. So we did all the preconception work in readiness for when she got married. And literally, she rang me and said, guess what? I've fallen pregnant first go. And I said to her, what do you mean first go? Well, she said, my husband's in the army. He had to go off on tour. And so we literally had a honeymoon. I was fertile at that time, and I'm pregnant. And she had the easiest pregnancy. And she's gone on to have, multiple kids. So you can really dramatically increase your chance of falling pregnant without spending thousands on IVF. I really believe that. Okay, so what I really want to get through to you today is that you really have two options. If you continue to do what you're doing now, then chances are you're going to end up the same way you've been ending up. And I want to say that in the nicest possible way. And I also want to say that under no circumstances is anything that you have done in the past wrong. You just didn't know. And I think this is what is frustrating for me, because if I could stand on every rooftop and say, hey, when you're thinking about pregnancy, could you please just check if you've got the MTHFR gene? I think a lot of fertility issues would be minimized. I don't think we would have 70 million couples that are classified with infertility. So I really want to say to you, use this webinar as impetus to really change what you're doing and make sure that you do the things that we've talked about today. Like really think about, all right, so if I need to avoid folic acid, great, I will do that. If I need to change the folate and I need to take a lot more, great, I'll do that. So what we'll do is we'll give you that support in helping you to know what to do, know when to do it, and know the dose that you should be taking. So unfortunately, I'm not taking on any more patients. I just am so busy. So what I did is I developed a pregnancy course that I help people through that. And we have Facebook groups, we've got recordings, we've got all that sort of stuff. But I have my support practitioners that do work with the fertility course patients in case they want an appointment at any point in time. But when you think about it, like this woman that was in our thesis case study, our case series, she'd had 10 failed IVF. Now, here in Australia, the average rate for an IVF is about $8,000. That's $80,000 that she spent in trying to fall pregnant. 80,000. And yet she fell pregnant without having to do, well, I think she might have still done the IVF, but she fell pregnant and successfully had a pregnancy. So even if you think IVF is the way to go, to do all this before IVF, chances are it's successful the first time. And that's what we need to do, is minimize the amount of times that people are trying to fall pregnant. Because it's just, I find this really crazy. So the fertility course, just to let you know, it is a step-by-step course, and you are literally taken through module 1 right through to module 8. And it teaches you, it gives you blood reference ranges so that you can get your results. It gives you referrals. So if your doctor doesn't come to the party and you need a referral from us to get your bloods done, all the referrals are in there. It then gives you sheets to fill out to know where you're high, where you're low. It also gives you your MTHFR polymorphism and gives you the level and form of folate that you should be aiming for. And then we have Facebook groups along the way each month so that you can ask questions, you can get support. We've even had one of our patients, one of our course participants rang up from the labor ward in the US and joined that group to say to everybody that she was in labor and things were starting to happen. So it's a beautiful, and what I think that helps with the success of the course is that you are all in the same boat. And so there's a lot of beautiful camaraderie, there's a lot of support from other members of the course, because few people really understand what you're going through right now. And not being able to fall pregnant is probably one of the most horrible things and the most anxiety fulfilling conditions that you can have. So having this support with other people in the same boat is actually beautiful. And it's a fabulous group. So I just wanted to say that, of course. So the course is normally $9.97, and we want to just, because it's a what do you call it? Black Friday or whatever sale, we thought we would offer you the course for the next 24 hours at $5.97. Now you will get an email at the end of this. You will get your money back within the first 30 days if you're not happy and you haven't been able to do everything that we ask you to do. But here's Sarah said she rated the course 10 out of 10. She loved everything about it. She's learned a lot of valuable information that she will use for the rest of her life and has been able to help family members and friends, because if you have MTHFR, chances are your parents do, your brothers do, your sisters do. So it becomes this knock-on effect of families saying, hey, I've got MTHFR. Did you know that you might have it as well? You need to check it. And so there's a lot of really good information that you'll get from this. Forget the fertility side of it, but just from a health component, it becomes a really important thing to discover. So it is one of a kind because we are the only dedicated MTHFR clinic in the world. I realized a long time ago, I can't see every fertility patient, but by creating the course, it gives you the opportunity to do what you need to do to successfully fall pregnant. And we totally understand that some of you will need support through the way of appointments, and we've got our fertility practitioners on hand if you ever need that. So Neve's going to put the link into the chat box if any of you are interested and you want to do it right now. You will also get an email at the end, so don't worry if you don't want to make a decision right this second. You've got 24 hours to make that decision to be a part of the course for that special offer. And that's really the information. So let me just go into the Q&A because I know that there's okay, so Sarah, I'm heterozygous and I've had 2 miscarriages, discovered at 12 weeks, baby measured 9 weeks. I have been taking 800 micrograms of methylfolate for over a year. How much do you recommend I increase to? Do you also recommend aspirin, Levinox, or progesterone support for future pregnancies? So Sarah, there's a lot of things you've got to consider. So one of the most important nutrients that you need to use that folate is B12. So one of the things we talk about in the course is how do you evaluate whether or not your B12 is low? Because if your B12 is low, you're not going to use that folate. So it doesn't actually really matter how much folate you're taking. You may not be using it and utilizing it properly because you've got a problem with B12. Vegans, vegetarians, people who don't eat meat can often have problems. But we find that a lot of our fertility patients actually have problems with genes that carry the B12 to the cell. And if that's the case, then we need to prescribe some B12 injections for them. It's also other nutrients that come into play. So it's not all about the methylfolate, but I would say you need to be over 1,000. I would say you're not taking enough. My first, and progesterone support, you would need to evaluate what your progesterone level is in the blood, and then you would need, yes, support for that. And we can give, you can either get your doctor to prescribe it, or you can take natural progesterone support, which we use most of the time. Aspirin, Levinox, I wouldn't think so because you're not homozygous. And it will really depend on some of your other key blood markers and your family history. You know, is there any varicose veins in the family? Is there any cardiovascular disease? Do you have high blood pressure? So there's a lot of things that would come into play there. Many doctors in the US don't value MTHFR as a valid contributing factor for recurrent pregnancy loss. Do you have a standard protocol you'd be willing to share so I can guide my reproductive endocrinologist on the importance of this factor and advocate for future pregnancies? So one of the things we can do, Sarah, and one of the things we like to do is get doctors like that involved as an affiliate for our course. So we actually give them instructions on, we do a webinar for practitioners that teaches them the importance of this. And I'm about to do one that is going to be the presentation of my research. So if you would like to send us your doctor's details, we can get in touch with them and suggest that you have said, you know, you'd like more information. And that's probably the best way that I teach them what they need to know. And then they can use the course as a tool in their clinic so that anyone that does that comes to see them, they do the background stuff that we want them to do to support what he does. And I think that's the best way to handle it. Nikki was diagnosed with MTHFR homozygous and factor V Leiden. Okay. 2 successful pregnancies on Clexane, and my boys are now 11 and 8. Recently experienced my first miscarriage at 8 weeks, 4 days. Doctors don't know much about these disorders and don't take them seriously. Do you have any advice? Yeah, so you are not taking nearly enough. I don't know how many of the MTHF tablets you've been taking, but I would say you're probably not taking nearly enough if you're homozygous. So there's a lot of things in that where you've got the factor V Leiden as well. There's a lot of things that you'll need to do back end. And what we do from a fertility standpoint when you are pregnant is we give you a lot of nutrients to support that. If you've had the Clexane and that's worked successfully for you, that's great. But I would guess that after 2 pregnancies, you just haven't, your bucket of folate just isn't enough, Nikki. So you really need to up it by the sounds of it. Would you recommend the methylation test from Nutripath? So I would, but 90% of you will come back with a high folinic, a low methyl, and a low to middle tetrahydrofolate. And yes, that can give you some good insight. But what I would do is I would actually address all the issues first and then do it, because there's not really much point in doing it now because we know you're probably going to be deficient anyway. So I think you're better off to do it when we think and know that things are pretty good, and then think about doing that test. All right, how are we going for time? I know there's a couple more questions. All right. Okay, let's have a look. I've just got Nikki. Okay, we've done that. Okay, so this is another one that says, okay, I just need to bring this up because there's a lot here. Okay, so this one, Linda, potential partner has it, not with him now, and thankfully have a 29-year-old daughter. Doing this as a practitioner now so I can help my young ones. Awesome. Okay, Linda. Well, again, if you'd like to be a part of our affiliate program for this course, we'd love to have you there because we want as many practitioners as we can to promote this. So if you get in touch with Neve at that email address on the screen, admin@mthfrsupport.com.au, we'd love to include you in that. I'm so glad you're doing it. Hi, Carolyn. Hope you're well. I've been reading your website, and very rightly so. I've had 3 miscarriages in the last year. I've just had private blood tests taken and have found out I have MTHFR gene, the heterozygous one, and I've been given no advice, no help or anything. Surprise, surprise. They've just told me I have this gene and said, go to the doctors. Oh, yes. So as you can imagine, I'm beside myself worrying what on earth is going on, and am I ever going to be able to have a baby? I seem to fall very quickly. Yes. So Claire, the good news is, the really great news is, you know, and this is what is so exciting. If you know and you fix it, there's no risk. There's no risk. So I would say to you, do the course. Jump in, start the program, understand what you need to do, because it's really simple. You do it at your own speed. So if you want to do all the modules in 1 week, you can do that. We've got a Neve, I can't remember when our next catch up on the Facebook group, but it's either this Friday or next Friday. So you can get help along the way, Claire, but please don't worry. Honestly, the fact that you know this is so exciting, it's going to change your life. So don't be worried. Don't be upset. Don't think this is a death sentence, because it's not. It's really exciting that you now know, because the chances of you, if you do what you need to do, the chance of you miscarrying again is minimal, because if you've got your B12 right, if you've got your folate right, if you've got the other nutrients right, which we take you through in the course, then your success rate is at least 80%. Okay. A 12-year-old grandson recently diagnosed as type 1 diabetic after going into a coma, had a virus. My daughter with 70% MTHFR had a request for him to be tested, ignored. I sent a letter of complaint to the hospital, food given after 3 days in ICU. Oh my goodness, fish and chips, chicken nuggets and potato wedges. Her ignored request. 2 weeks later, got a phone call apologising. They already test mothers that miscarry, so not an unknown factor. Thanks for covering the topics you do. I forwarded some to the local medical clinic. As usual, not interested. So Sarah, again, jump onto the website. Any of you that are not getting support from the medical fraternity, jump on the website, do it yourself. And this is one of the things that I think is most important about these sessions. If you are empowered to know what to do and when to do it, the fear goes away, right? Because you know that what you're doing is right. You've got the support to know what you're doing. So don't leave it to doctors and the medical fraternity to take control of this. You do it. If you know you have MTHFR, you know you've got to make up for it, because it's going to affect your immune system, hence the diabetes quite often. Hormones, your mood, your detoxification, your muscle development, it all relies on that little methyl group. And if you don't have enough, then you can definitely get that deficit. Cecilia, would blood work taken in the past 6 months be applicable? Yes, it would. Yes, if it's within the last 6 months, that's absolutely fine. Sophia, I read studies that show that later in pregnancy, it's not okay to take more than 2,000 of folate. Aha, that was folic acid. It was not methylfolate. So that test, the studies that were related to that was not about methylfolate, it was folic acid. So in our research study, the average amount of folate taken was 2,800 micrograms to achieve pregnancy. So don't worry about that, because that study was on folic acid. Sarah, I'm heterozygous for both, so you're compound heterozygous. So if you've got one of the A1298C, one of the C677T, we call that compound heterozygous, and that's a 50% down regulation. My folate levels are not low on blood results. Could that mean I'm not using? That's exactly what it means. So what you actually find with people with MTHFR, when you do a blood test for folate, it's high. Why is it high? Because it's not getting into the cell. It's not being utilized. So you may see it low, but more often than not, you see it high. Cecilia, I went to purchase a course and the discount isn't applied at the payment page. Neve, can you get on to that? Cecilia, we will make sure that we fix that. Neve, if you can hear me, can you make sure that that is applied ASAP? Cecilia, email admin@mthfrsupport.com.au right now. So Neve has your details just in case we need to get in touch with you. This Thursday is the catch up at 9 a.m. for the fertility course. So if you feel like doing it, does that mean tomorrow, Neve? So it must be tomorrow. So if you feel like, oh, okay, I want to get on and I want to see what this is all about, you have the right supplement, or who do you recommend? So we have our MTHFR Support Prenatal. We made that because we wanted something that we felt had the right amount of B vitamins and other key supports. There is actually no other prenatal in Australia that has the zinc as high as we do. They don't have the other B vitamins necessarily as high. Now, in Australia, unfortunately, we can only put 500 micrograms, but we have add-on products that we use, and they're in a drop form so that you can step your folate up slowly. And that's what you need to do. Take it slowly, because if you go straight to a big dose, chances are, Neve said, try again now and see if you can log in. All right, so are there any other, so that was in the chat. Let me have a look in the Q&A if there's any other. So there's a lot of you, I don't know all your different backgrounds, but we had hundreds and hundreds of people register for this, and it's really good because, as I said, if we could just spread the word, and I'm hoping that for those of you that find out if you have the MTHFR because of this webinar, it will change the way that you do things, and you can pass it on to other women who may be having difficulties like you. And we have these webinars every month. We also have these webinars available on our website at any point in time. So send them to our group, send them to our website, and just share the word, because we really, really need people to understand that this is important. And the more and more research, and I'm hoping that we can do more and more research to really get the practitioners and the fertility specialists to stand up and say, okay, maybe this is important. Maybe I should be checking it for every single woman that comes through the door. And that's what we can only hope for. So thank you so much and if any of you tried to get in and couldn't, please just email Neve, admin@mthfrsupport.com.au. We'll send you all an email today. So if you want to think about it, you want to be part of the course, you want to join us for the first group tomorrow, then please do. We'd love to have you there. And I really wish you all the success in your fertility journey. Thank you so much. I look forward to catching up with you. Bye for now.